I would like to call this meeting back to order. First of all, we'll start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. All board members are present. And are there any agenda modifications? Thank you. No. Moving on. Mr. Wolf.
Good evening, Superintendent Perry, Chair Kylo, and members of the board. Tonight, we're going to have a brief presentation on contracting methodologies, also an overview of your role as a board and the ORS that gives you the authority in this area around contracting, public contracting. So I want to orient you to the documents that you have. You should have the slides, copy of the slides, and also basically just a briefing paper on contracting. We'll go over a lot of the information in the briefing paper during the presentation, and then there's one other document that will be passed out as we're going through the presentation. So you may remember back in August, at your annual planning session, we had a conversation about the contracts, some methodologies to consider in the future, and we said that we'd be coming back. And so here we are 5 months later having that conversation, which will lead to, depending on where you want to go with this conversation, could lead to formal presentation in February with a decision in March on specific contracting techniques and methodologies to be used in the bond. So, moving along, we've got the school board's role as defined by ORS 279. And ORS 279 has an A, B, and C section, just to give you a little more background. The A is the general provisions, which essentially define your role as a local contracting agency and also your role as a local contract review board. And we'll talk about that specific role as we move into the other part of 279, which is C, .335, which gives you exemption authority for competitive low bid contracting. And so talk about that here in just a second. So there are some typical contracting methodologies. The one that is the industry standard and the one that the entire competition is based on is called traditional design bid build responsive competitive low bid. And so what that means in essence is, and actually I have a picture here. This is low tech, but it'll work. So essentially in the design bid build process, now this is the same process that we used to put a man on the moon and bring him home, okay? It's what the entire industry is built on. And to do anything other than public contracting with design bid build as the methodology requires an exemption. And that's where you as the local contract review board have the authority to make the decision for an exemption to the competitive low bid, right? Responsive low bid. So what happens during the design bid build process, this isn't going to work all that way, but I'll speak up. You essentially have three silos, right? You have the architects, engineering team doing the design. The contract is with you, with us, the owner, right? Just like there's no perfect memo, there's no perfect design, all right? Their job is to meet our requirements. So they design what we have identified as a scope for the project. They design, they design biddable documents, biddable to the construction industry. And so the construction industry receives those biddable documents, construction documents that have gone through the design phase, and they apply cost estimation to it. Now, our A&E company has given us what they believe to be the cost of the project, right? So we have an idea what we should expect from the construction industry, but there's no interaction with the construction industry at all. hence the silos that you see here. And then the construction industry responds based on the documents with a bid. It's a sealed bid, all right? And in this methodology, we as an owner generally do not have any flexibility but to accept a low bid. Now, it has to be a responsible low bid, right? We have some discretionary decision-making if it was a crazy low bid and it was out of the norm, but nevertheless, it is a competitive low bid system, okay? So you can see that it's very siloed as we move through. There's nothing wrong with this, it just is the methodology, okay? Any questions on that one?
Simple.
No? Okay. And now,
Do you have a question, Marty?
I do have one question. I worked on RFPs before and stuff, and I know that low bid is not always the bid you really want. What is the process for changing that if the board decided they didn't want necessarily just the low bid?
that's a perfect segue to the next topic, which is the alternative contracting methodologies. Thank you, and we did not talk about this prior to the presentation. So you have, I put some of the more common ones up there, and we'll spend quite a bit of time on construction manager, general contractor, CMGC here in just a minute. But like, for instance, if you had, in addition to, let's say, Autzen Stadium, okay? And you knew, as the owner, that you had to have that stadium open for fall football season. You could, if you were the local contractor review board, you could accept findings of fact that would lead you to say, we want an A plus B contract. A being the price, B being the schedule. So now you've added another variable to price. Low bid, schedule. Or for very, very complex and large projects, typically you see this in the vertical construction industry quite a bit, but also large complex interchanges in transportation or bridges, large complex bridges. You'll often see design build contracts. And what that looks like is you hire a design builder that provides all of the services that you need for that particular project. They're an at-risk provider, but risk is always priced at a premium. So in a design build, you may actually pay more than a design bid build, but the design builder owns all of the risk of the project, and they're designing it and building it simultaneously, so it's not a sequential process at all. And then there's the CMGC construction manager, general contractor methodology that we'll be spending the rest of the presentation on, describing that in a little bit more detail. The briefing paper that you have also describes this in more detail as well. Now, there's another picture that I want to draw real quick on the CMGC for you to show the difference. And I'll do it right below this one. So in the CMGC, we're always the owner and we're always in charge. Okay? But we're not relinquishing that responsibility. But we have a contract with the architectural engineering firm. We also have a contract with the construction manager, general contractor. We have a team. There's no silos, right? The construction manager is so CMGC has two hats, and they can wear them simultaneously or separately. As a construction manager, the services that are provided help influence the design, right, during the design process, so that the design is built for constructability, right? Because in the design bid build, there's no perfect design. You find out how imperfect it is through change orders during the construction phase, right? During the CMGC process, the construction manager is influencing the design in features such as constructability, maintainability, and sustainability, long-term sustainability of the product and the project. okay? And they can flip over and put their general contractor hat on when the timing's right. Let's say in the design process, all of the electrical and mechanical issues are designed. I can put my general contractor hat on now, and I can go out and secure the skilled trades, the subs, necessary to do that work, instead of trying to pull them all together in a bid process, right, to put the cost estimation together in the design bid build. So basically what you have, the CMGC process is a collaborative team environment, okay, where you're designing the building, the structure, the project for constructability. There's value engineering that happens, and value engineering is essentially staying within scope, schedule, and budget, but finding more efficient and creative ways to design and build the project. The other thing that a CMGC, a contractor, does for us as a district or any organization is the time to market, the time to actually go out into the construction industry and secure the subcontractors. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the benefits that we could experience and have experienced in the district. So you have the authority under ORS 279C.335 as the contract review board to exempt certain classes of projects from competitive low bid, design bid build. There are requirements, and the ORS lines them out very specifically. There's a handout that is coming your way that has much more detail in it around what the requirements would look like in a findings of fact that would support your decision should you choose to make it to use CMGC methodology. I'll let that get around the dais. I'm not going through this document tonight, but we wanted you to have it, and if you have any questions, then we would be happy to be able to answer those prior to the next meeting. But what you can see, if you flip over to the second page of the document that was just handed out, you can see under project description, you can see some of the criteria that the district would apply to certain projects, like, for instance, sites with multiple building additions and renovations. Projects that exceed $35 million, those are big, complex projects. All of our high schools exceed $35 million, for example. And they have everything from seismic strengthening to HVAC mechanical system repair to the schedule complexities and the logistics of actually having an active construction site during an active school year. So it's about a 15-month summer-to-summer project at our high schools. Actually, at any of the schools, all 29 of our schools that have capital construction projects in the bond would have that requirement, but certainly wouldn't meet the dollar amount, right? So the not to exceed 35 million. So that gives you a sense of what some of the criteria could look like in a findings of fact that would support a decision around using CMGC as an alternative contracting methodology. There's also a public hearing requirement, so would be noticed 14 days prior to your meeting, and during the meeting you would have to hold a public hearing for anyone who would like to provide testimony to your decision. And again, as I had mentioned before, the CMGC has built into it the collaborative approach, but that's not the main reason necessarily. That's very beneficial. You have what's called a guaranteed maximum price. And so during the design phase, right, at a certain point, whether it's 40% complete, 50% complete, 60% complete, depends on the project, the scope of the project, and the requirements, the CMGC will issue us, and we will accept or modify a guaranteed maximum price proposal from them. That puts them at risk. In other words, there's no change order process like in a design bid build. That doesn't mean that throughout the course of executing the project, we wouldn't find things that no one understood were part of the site or the conditions. Let's say there's an archaeological issue once we get into demoing a certain site. Those are things we just couldn't necessarily know. That's as an example. We don't think that's going to be the case. But that would cause us to sit down with the CMGC and have a conversation. But nevertheless, a guaranteed maximum price puts that contractor at risk. The project will come in. There's price certainty built in, unlike a design bid build, where through numerous change orders, you may find yourself as an owner, we may find ourselves paying more than what our architect estimated the project to be, and certainly more than what the bid was that we accepted. And so it's a method of allocating risk, and the risk is allocated to the contractor with the GMP. I know that was kind of fast, but that essentially gives you everything that we have to provide tonight, a brief overview of some basic traditional contracting methodologies, what it means as a board to be a local contracting review board, and where you derive that authority. Now, one of the questions that we receive, have in the past, and will continue to receive is, does using CMGC prohibit local contractors from bidding? I see east-west shaking. The answer is no. It isn't, because it wouldn't be allowed by law, right? ORS 279 promotes competitiveness in the industry. Part of the findings of fact, we as a district have to show you the benefits of using this methodology and the fact that it wouldn't create favoritism or that it wouldn't diminish the competitive environment. And that's on us to provide those facts to you. Now, the fact of the matter is that CMGC contractors typically use local subcontractors because it's cheaper, they understand the community, they understand the work of the school district, and many of the contractors, which would be subs to a CMGC, have done work for us as generals before, right? So when we have a contract with an electrical company, that's a direct contract between us, the owner, and that company. So there's a great benefit locally to using either a methodology, design, bid, build, or CMGC. And with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Questions? Sharon?
Thank you. So just real quick, these might be more of comments than questions, but you mentioned with CMGC that it doesn't allow for change orders, but my understanding is you can roll a number of change orders into an amendment for a CMGC. So it's not to say that whatever we set the initial contract will necessarily be what we come out with, but that's part of this process. And being the owner, we are keeping a close eye on that. So as things come up and we roll in, you know, we're still staying within time and budget, but I just don't want there to be the misunderstanding that we can't use change orders or that they don't happen with CMGC.
Right, and you're right, it's typically, and I think I may have mentioned that, it's typically part of unknown site conditions as opposed to, and they're always negotiable.
Right.
Yeah, because the CMGC is part of the team, as opposed to a standalone entity that isn't collaboratively working from the beginning of the design. Or actually, the CMGC doesn't start from the beginning of the design.
Right.
There's preliminary design that the A&E firm does with us. We get to a certain point at around 30, 40, 50% design is when a CMGC will come onto the team.
Right.
But there's enough time left to make sure constructability, maintainability, and sustainability are built into the design.
Right.
Okay. Chuck and Sharon.
Mike, refresh my memory. Did we use CMGC in 2008?
We did, yeah, fairly extensively, and we have the results from that. That will be part of the final findings of fact that we'll be able to bring to you. Also, as part of this methodology, you have to have the findings of fact that estimate the benefits of using this, but you also have to do the report at the end to show whether or not you realize those benefits. So it isn't just a promise that this will be a better methodology. You actually have to have the proof.
Sharon, then Chuck.
Just one other, with regards to one of your comments about subs, using local subs, and the fact that, don't pay transportation, don't pay lodging, don't pay all that. That's not built into the contract. But the other thing is, I believe we have the ability in a contract like this to set a minimum percentage or number. I think I've seen it set as a percentage of requirement for local subs. Not that we would necessarily need to, but I think that can be built into a contract if we thought that if a contractor is not from the local area and we had a concern about that, that can be built into a CMGC contract.
It can, and it's also built in and inherent in the conversations. So the way that we've run, as a district, the way that we've run, that's a really good point, the way that we've run CMGC contracts in the past is, while we don't approve the sub, right, because then we'd shift the risk from the contractor to us. They'd say, well, you told us to use this one, and they're not doing well. Now it's on you instead of us. What we do, though, is we make sure that those requirements are at least part of the conversation. Yep.
Okay, Chuck.
How involved would the board be in these discussions? It sounds like potential's there for the board to really get into the weeds on an awful lot of these discussions.
No, the way that this process works is through the report of the findings of fact that justify the use of CMGC. You give the district the authority to use this methodology as long as we meet the criteria that I discussed earlier, like the project must exceed 35 million, must have multiple systems involved, HVAC, mechanical, seismic strengthening, those types of things. In particular, I think one of the big differences between 2008 and the 2018 bond is that we used CMGC quite extensively in the repair and renovation work in the 2008 bond because there were all those multiple systems in a school, right? Plumbing, electrical, mechanical, all of that. What we're looking at here for the 2018 bond is essentially the high school projects, which are 35 million plus active. I mean, these are major capital investments in an active school site. And the logistics of pulling this off, we believe, will require collaboration as opposed to a siloed approach. Now, the vast majority of the projects in the bond will likely go traditional design, bid, build. It's a solid methodology. But when you add the levels of complexity that we'll have at our high school projects, we believe that CMGC offers some great benefits to the district.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Superintendent Perry?
I just had one quick update for the board around our work with Pearson. I do think I have reached a almost final agreement with Pearson around materials, some additional materials for us. And it's in the form of, it's over $500,000. It would give decodable readers to all first and second grade classrooms, both Spanish and English classrooms, for every first and second grade classroom in the district. So it's not quite to the full amount, but we're over halfway there. And I think that's going to be the end of our negotiations with them. So I'm just letting you know that.
All right, thank you. Anything else? Okay. We're just about to adjourn unless someone else has something they want to add. Was that Jim?
Surprise, I'm going to talk about the last thing the superintendent mentioned.
That shocks me.
I'm sure it does. I want to thank the superintendent or staff for working with Pearson on this. Still disgruntled with Pearson personally when we spent millions of dollars on a curriculum that didn't meet the needs of the district, that we had to spend resources and time on this. Plus, As I think in the last meeting, I asked superintendent how much staff time was spent in developing the curriculum needed for our Hispanic students. It was almost $900,000 in expended time, resources, and materials. I think that is a shame to our students that are Hispanic, and it took time to get that program to them. I think Pearson should have listened to what we needed and done what we wanted in the first place. I'm glad they're willing to do at least something here. And I hope as we do curriculum purchases in the future, we'll be able to ask more specific questions related to the population of the Salem Keizer School District. With this particular population continuing to grow in our school district, I still believe Pearson acted discriminatory in nature with regard to how we did this. And I'm glad our staff was willing to step up. So I want to thank the staff who did all the work to make sure these kids had a curriculum. And I want to thank Superintendent and her staff for working with Pearson. I know I may have been a little bit of a stickler on this, but we spent millions on a curriculum and didn't get what we wanted, so thank you.
Anyone else? I would like to say our thoughts and prayers go out to the family of the student that we lost last night. So that's it. Okay, with that, we are adjourned. Jesse, you get to go home?